Ooh, Facebook Live has a new update. They now give you a countdown to going live. That's fun. Hello, lovelies. If you are seeing this, you are catching the replay. So, do me a huge favor and drop replay in the comments, and then comment as if you are live. I go through, I read every single comment. If you had something to say, if you had something to respond to that I said, I would love to know what that was so that I can interact with you and reply if it's appropriate in the comments as well. So, comment as if you are live. I am that girl. What girl? And always have been. Like, and yes, we will get there. But I'm so curious if you were also that girl. As I start to go through this, I am so curious if you were also that girl. So it's so fascinating to me how generational patterns work, continue, how we just assume things from our family and continue on, and it takes somebody like me, and if you're watching this, probably somebody like you, to be like, no, it stops here. No more. And so I actually got my period when I was 12 years old and 2 months. Oddly enough, my mom was also 12 years old and 2 months. And her mom was pretty sure when that happened that she was also 12 years old and 2 months. Pretty freaking phenomenal if you ask me, that's like 3 times. Like, we have these generational bad things that we seem to find and also generational good things, but this feels kind of neutral, and yet it carries through. Those are just the generations that I know of that it was true for, which is pretty cool. If you have something similar, like you know that you got your period at the same time, that's actually called menarche, as your mother or as her mother or a sister or an aunt, I would love it if you would share that in the comments for me. And so when I got it, I remember, oh my gosh, I remember. It was like, my first one was brown, like very, very not much there, kind of brown. The day of, I thought that maybe I didn't wipe well. And then in the morning, it was still there, and my mom had prepped in the way that she had prepped me. Like, I have all of these things so that when this happens someday, I have all of these things. And I'm like, okay, so Mom, I need some of those things. Well, what Mom had got oh my gosh. So she had had a hysterectomy about 6 years, 5 or 6 years before I actually got my period for the first time. And I don't know if maybe, like, prior to that, I don't know what she used, but I feel like what she had on hand for me was very dated and very large and very bulky. Let me know if you had a similar experience. Like, your girl felt like she was walking down the school hallway with a diaper on, and I was pretty sure that everybody... I have a spider coming off my ring light. Got it. I was pretty sure that everybody in school knew that I was wearing a diaper and knew why I was wearing a diaper. And so that first day, that's how that went. And my mom had a friend that she apparently told everything to, because she called me that evening to congratulate me that I had become a woman, basically. The only person who treated me like that. The only one who called to say, hey, congratulations. And at the time, because of my programming, because of what I had had for life experiences up to that point, I was programmed that this was a bad thing. But there was this one beautiful woman in our world who was like, no, congratulate her, encourage her. She has began womanhood. And so I don't think I received it well then, and it took me several years actually to get to a point of receiving it well, but I will never forget who that woman was or that she had those words to say for me. That was amazing. And then, so those first few months, probably even the first year of having a period, like I would get my pad out of my locker, you know, and make sure nobody's watching. I'd pull it out and I'd like shove it down in my pants. Usually I didn't have a pants pocket because, you know, women's clothing and pockets, they just don't go together. So it was like in the waistband of my pants, right? And then like shuffling to the bathroom so that it doesn't go down my pants leg, because that would be worse than walking around school thinking everyone knows that I'm wearing a diaper. And then, okay, where's everybody at right now? Well, some of them are in the cafeteria and some of them are at recess, and that class just got done with PE, and so they're probably in the locker room, so it would be really full if I went to the locker room to do this. No, maybe this bathroom would be the one with the least amount of people in it. And so I go to the one that I thought had the least amount of people in it. And I'd sit down, and if someone was in there, I'd just wait. And I'd just wait. I'd just wait until they left. But sometimes they weren't leaving, and I would have to do it anyway. And so let me know. Let me know if you did this too. And so I had like green always pads. And so I would like slip, there was like a white tab here, and so I would, quiet as I can, pull it up, and then I'd slip my finger down, because that end was open other than the white piece. So slip my finger down, and then it was like crimped, right, to close it on both sides. And it was folded in thirds, something like this, folded in thirds. And so on this end that's open, because I just did the white tab, I would slip my finger in and like as quietly, as slowly, painstakingly slowly as I could, I'd slip my finger down it so that it would open as quietly as possible. And then I'd go to the other side and I'd slip my finger in and I'd do the same thing to pull all of those crimped edges away from each other. Somebody else just walk in the bathroom. I gotta be quiet again. And I'd sit there and I'd wait. I'd be really, really quiet, and maybe they'd leave and maybe they wouldn't, and I'd just have to do it anyway. So then I've got this part of the thirds done, and now I have to do this part. And so I do the same thing again, I do the same thing again, and now it's open, but it's sitting on, you know, the plastic piece. And there's just no way to do that quietly. And so if there's anyone in there, you just rip the Band-Aid off and go as fast as you can and hope that maybe they don't notice. Or maybe you could wait just a little bit longer and they'll leave so that there's nobody else in there when you take that big piece of plastic away from the pad itself. I would love to know if I was the only one that did this or if there was a lot of you that did this. My guess is it's the latter, but maybe girls weird. I don't know. And so I did this for like a year. Just this like sneaky, maybe nobody'll know. And that's because of the programming I had up to that point. I felt very, very isolated, even though just about every other 12, 13, 11, 14-year-old girl was doing the exact same thing I was, right? I mean, maybe 16, but for the most part, we were all doing the same thing. And I remember going with a friend of mine that was in the same grade as me for her birthday party in October. Yes, I remember when most of my classmates, initial classmates' birthdays were. I graduated with a much bigger class, but the ones that we went like K-8 together, I remember most of their birthdays. And so she invited me to go with her and her family like 90 minutes away to the city. And we were going to go out to this Mexican restaurant, and it was just I was like the only one invited, which was super cool. That didn't happen. Like if I was invited, that was cool. But to be the only one invited, that is freaking amazing. And so I was super excited, and we're like on our way, and I don't remember all of the details of how I found out, but she was on her period on her birthday. And, you know, it was probably a girls' bathroom trip, you know, giggly preteen girls, or teenage at that point, maybe, girls' bathroom trip. And she's like, I know, because, you know, we're friends and we're on this trip together and there's no way to really not know. And the conversation opened up between us about, well, when did you start? And when did you start? And what about this? And what about that? And all of these things that I had never in my life before felt free to talk to anyone else about. Would my mom have talked to me about it? Yeah, she would have. But I hadn't been given that invitation, I guess. And so I was like, still the taboo kind of attitude around it. Other than that one woman who had congratulated me on my very first day of my bleed. And so being able to open up and talk to this friend while we're on this trip was so freeing to me. And I started to think, and this is how I think through a lot of things anymore, but it's almost like the first time that I really went through this sequence of thoughts. We're all doing this. Like, basically any girl I go to school with is doing it, at least knows about it, and will do it soon. Almost every woman, except my mom, because she had a hysterectomy 5 years ago, but she did it still. So basically every woman that I could possibly know has done this at least for a little while. We talk about eating. We talk about brushing our teeth. We talk about showering. Some people talk about peeing and pooping. Why don't we talk about bleeding? Like, why is it so weird that everyone's hush hush and, ooh, she has her period now, and we gotta feel like we've gotta quietly open the pad up in the bathroom because of shame? And I sat myself back, like as a gentle observer at the age of about 13 going, why? What kind of sense does this make? And I became very open with women talking about natural bodily functions. Everybody has one. Everybody has a period. And it became so normal to me and so easy and so freeing. Oh my gosh, the gag order released. So freeing to be able to just talk about normal life. I would love to know if you've had a similar experience of just like, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about that. No, we don't talk about that. And then suddenly you realize that, why? And the gag order is released and you can breathe. You can talk about that, whatever that may be. And so yes, I'm that girl. And that girl evolved into one that not only talked about blood and periods and this thing that happens every month. It became the girl that talked about blood and periods and sex and relationships and, oh wait, there's not just bleeding, there's 4 stinking phases in your cycle and they all hold something absolutely incredible for you to use. If this is your first time seeing me, I'm Sarah Jordan and I'm that girl. How awesome is that? And so as that 12-year-old that had just gotten her period, who has this long history of, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. No, we don't talk about that either. I wish, and I'm going to give this to my girls in the best possible way that I can, that I would have had like a period club or somebody that was my age or multiple somebodies that were my age that we could talk about all of these things together freely and openly. I read stories in books of the woman who was the period girl just like I was, and she started a period club. She and like 2 or 3 friends, they had the period club, and she Like, it was before any of them were bleeding. Like, I think you're going to start first. I think you're going to start first. And I didn't have that. But hindsight, I really, really deeply wish that I would have had that kind of sisterhood, that kind of women's circle. And as I have grown and I have started to study history, that used to be present. It was called the Red Tent. And the Red Tent was specifically set up, and you can find it throughout multiple cultures. It may not be called the Red Tent, but you can find the concept throughout multiple cultures. But where I first started learning about it was from a Hebraic culture. And if you read the Bible, if you read Old Testament scripture, it can look very much like a woman is condemned because she bleeds or while she's bleeding. Like, ooh, she sat there. Don't sit there, it's unclean. That's not exactly. Unclean has an entirely separate meaning, and I'm not going to go into detail on that right now. If you ever wanted to study it out, I encourage you to do so. But the point is that the Hebraic culture valued their women, treasured their women so deeply because they bore life, that they understood that when a woman was bleeding, it was a sacred event. And they set aside space for her to take space for her in that time. This was the Red Tent, where a woman could go and she could free bleed. Have you ever heard of that? It's where you're like bleeding on towels. There's no pads, there's no tampons, there's no cups. You are bleeding as your body was intended to bleed. So she could go and she could do that. And she was there, like a girl's very first was a celebratory time. Just like the woman that called me that day and said, "Congratulations. You were welcomed into the Red Tent for the first time." There were candles, there was music, there was wise older women that were telling stories during this time. And my humble opinion is that the Red Tent was very full twice a month and not so much at other times of the month. I feel like it was very full at the new moon and very full at the full moon. In study, we say what the sages say. So it'd be like tradition would have it, I guess, that if you bleed with the full moon, you are a wise woman because you're needed to care for the rest of the culture, the rest of the people, the rest of the tribe. And so you bleed when the moon is full so that you can be present to take care of everyone else who typically would bleed with the new moon at that point. And now because of our light systems, because of the toxic load on our bodies, because of the pace that we keep nowadays, most women come into my world and they don't bleed with the moon at all. And they're like, I don't know what's going on. About 3 months in my world, we get you synced up, dear. But that is how I like to envision culture having been at that time. And so you would come into the Red Tent, regardless of whether it was your first bleed or your 100th bleed. We have approximately 450 in our life, I think, if I remember correctly. You come into the Red Tent and it is just this space. This, I'm not cooking. I'm not hauling water. I'm not chasing children. And you could have like a nursing babe with you. You could have and they nursed children till about 3 or 4. So you could have that size of a child with you at that point. But for me, that sounds so divine, so sacred, so special, so like there's a longing in me for that. And I sat over the last month or so working through this, thinking about this, going, what pieces do I want to incorporate? I'm not someone who ever envisions herself of hosting retreats, but I'm open to that changing. If anybody wants to change that. And I know that there are live red tent events and live women's circles, but the season that I'm in at this moment, that sounds like more than I have bandwidth for. And I'm okay with that, but I'm also okay with it changing. And so I was like, what can I present that is not something that people would need to travel to monthly? Because typically they take place at the new moon, a women's circle or a red tent event, or the full moon. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that a woman is bleeding at that time. It just means that you can come and have this experience, and then you can take that and hold that memory in your bleed whenever that happens to be. And so I was like, how can I do this? How can I work this? Because I have women in my inbox all the time. Well, Sarah, I have like drastic cramps all of a sudden, and I've never had cramps like this before in my life. What? Why? What? Why? And then, and I'll have other women who are like, wow, I've had pain my whole life, and I did that free course that you did in June, and I had my own womb healing experience, and this, and this happened. And I have had the first period of my life with no pain. I'm like, this is amazing. And yet so often when women come into my inbox with these pieces, and especially when they have questions, I'm like, time does not permit me to do this in the inbox, because I need to know your cycle length. I need to know how far apart they all are. I need to know how long you bleed for. I need to know what color the blood is. I need to know if it's been that color for a month or if it's been that way for 5 years. I need to know what your postpartums have looked like if you've had postpartums. I need to know how far postpartum you are if you are postpartum. Like, so many other pieces that I need in order to answer this question in my inbox of, why does it suddenly hurt? And so yes, my entire brand has these elements in it. I have courses on what to eat for your cycle phases. I have courses on how to work out for your cycle phases. And all of those pieces add up to a good bleed or a not so good bleed. But I was like, what would it have been like at 12 to be able to enter a red tent? What would I have desired in that time? And if that's what I desired then, is it something I desire now? Yes. Yes, it is still something that I desire now. Let's make it happen. And so what I have decided to do, and you can peep my stories. Oh, there's so much juice in my stories today. Oh my gosh. But what I have decided to do is create a red tent in the online space. We're going to call it Menstrual Magic. Menstrual Magic. It is ongoing. So if you don't bleed with the full moon or the new moon, it's ongoing. And so when you're bleeding, that online red tent space, that menstrual magic space, is still available for you. It's going to be housed in Marco Polo. So it will be a running chat. You can come in and ask questions. You can come in and say, this was what my last bleed was like. This is what this bleed is like. All of these pieces you can learn from others. This is the beauty of a mastermind. Sometimes we don't have anything to come in with, but we can sit there and listen and glean so much. And so this is my desire for Menstrual Magic, is to have this online red tent space for women to hold each other. Yes, I'll be there. Yes, I'm leading it, but to hold each other at this special, special time of our life. Once a month, I will be committed to being in there for the whole day, so that if you want like direct access, like what people try and get from me in the inbox of like, Sarah, I've never had a painful period before in my life, and now I do. That once a month day will be the space to just, eat your heart out, baby. What questions do you have? And I will be available for that day in that space. And I'll pop in and out at other times. But for sure there will be one day per month that you can have access to me. And I anticipate there will be, there will be access to 3 different courses that do talk, period, blood, and cycle phases. So if you're new to this space, you will have access to those 3 courses. And then I would like to, and I haven't yet decided, we're for sure going to do it quarterly. We may do it monthly. We'll see. I want to hold a womb healing space on Zoom. Sarah, what's womb healing? I love it. So much of us emanates from our core, from our womb space. And so women who have had any sort of trauma, any molestation, any rape, any feelings of shame, or you've been told, like you were never told the actual words of vulva or pussy or vagina, there's trauma there. If it was your cookie, if it was down there, if it was that thing or your girl parts, that holds trauma because you learned inadvertently to be ashamed somehow of that piece of your body. And so it could be as giant as child loss or molestation, or it could be as giant as just purely never being told what to call yourself, what to call those parts. And so when we come into that womb healing experience, it'll be for anything that you feel like is hurting, aching there. Our money comes through our womb space, through our sacral, which is partially our womb space. Our relationships, ability to hold our relationships comes through our womb space. Our feminine energy emanates from our womb space. And if there's trauma held there, if there's injury held there, you're blocking so much of the abundance that's available to you in this life. So like I said, for starters, for sure, we're going to hold that Zoom call once per quarter. Very, very possible that it would grow into once per month. So right now, because I just announced it in stories and here, Menstrual Magic is $44 per month. It is a 12-month commitment so that you can have the full experience of a online red tint. I still get chills saying that. For a year. Just to know what that feels like. What kind of sisterhood can be built in a year? What kind of womb healing can happen in a year? 3 months. I went from being in the fetal position on the floor with my period to pain-free. What can you do in a year? And then if you wanted to just pay in full for the year and be like, yes, I'm there, it is $477 to pay in full. That story went up this morning at like 4 a.m. my time, about that time. I couldn't sleep, so I was like, oh, I'm excited. I'm just going to put these out there. When it expires at about 4 a.m., 6 a.m. Eastern, 4 a.m. my time tomorrow, that price goes up to $55 per month. So if this has intrigued you, if you said yes to opening a pad, if you said yes to feeling like there is shame about your body ever in your existence, this is the Period Club. This is the online space for you inside of Menstrual Magic. And it is open to bleeding and non-bleeding women. Like if you're in menopause or beyond, you are welcome there. If you are breastfeeding and pregnant and you haven't actually had more than like 3 periods in 9 years, you're still welcome in that space. And I feel like it will still hold so much value for you. There's a lot of trauma that can be had around birth, womb trauma. And that is something that we're going to explore in those womb healing sessions. So if this has resonated with you, even in the little leastest bit, I would love it and so appreciate it if you would share this video because there are women in your world that are like, oh, yes, an online red tent space. Oh yes, let me have some of that. So, and if you share it in the comments and share it publicly, I will absolutely add you to my infinity cup here with all the names of people that share my live videos. And once every 5 or 6 weeks, a name comes out of here. And we're actually at that point. So get your name in the cup. And I will see all of you lovelies inside Menstrual Magic.